Culture. Particularly at the moment, there's a lot of conversation around if we can just get people back to the office, our culture will improve. Or ever since COVID, we haven't been able to do X, Y, and Z. And if people would just come back into the office, we'd be able to be as great as we were or greater than we were before. So there's two questions around this. One is, does getting people back into the office equal culture? Because there's a sense that it will or does. And the other is, there are a lot of teams that are struggling with embracing what is, frankly, a new reality.
Yeah.
How, in the spirit of change, should leaders and managers be thinking about that now?
Well, to the first question, I think the reason people draw that conclusion is because somebody clues them into the fact that a lot happened when we were all in the office informally that kind of passed the culture on to new employees, that reinforced the culture because of informal interactions and me bumping into you in the hallway. And so which is an accurate observation. Then they flip it around and say, if we're missing something on culture, we'll just throw them back in the office. That'll all somehow mysteriously happen again, and it'll be good. There's no evidence of that at this point.
No, there isn't.
I think we know a lot about culture. It's been studied for many decades now. But within the context that a lot of firms have to deal with it in this back to the office, and what else can we do to create and then perpetuate a useful culture, come back to what useful means.
Yes.
I think people are still, and I feel like I'm still learning as this thing is evolving.
Yeah.
The only thing that I concluded early on is people 2 years ago who were saying, in July of 2020, we're going to do A, B, and C.
Yes.
And I was thinking, geez, why? What information do you got that I don't have?
That says we're going to be
in
a different place.
But even now, people are changing what they're saying about going back. How many days? What kind of people? Under what kind of ground rules? Because we've never done this before.
No.
And what companies, governments, nonprofits desperately need is not just insight into that one question. That one question is, in a sense, an example of a whole category of questions about what we should do differently to adapt to new realities. And I think the single biggest challenge that a lot of organizations have is developing a lot more change muscle, if you will, that will help them adapt to what will be a continuing series of new things that are going to hit us.
Yes.
And some people realize that. A lot do not.
Yeah.
Which is not good for any of us right now.
The idea of an adaptive culture, I think, is something that really gets me excited. But I think it also makes leaders nervous.
Yeah.
And it makes them nervous because you need to know, culture will evolve. I'll say to a team, every team has a culture. But the question is it the culture you want? And is it the culture that you need? Because even the culture you want may not be the one you need. I hear the word, for example, collaboration thrown around a lot in the context of culture, which I think is wrong. I don't think culture can be collaborative. But nonetheless, I'll hear the word, we collaborate a lot. And what tends to then happen is you'll find 14 people joining a Teams call or a Zoom call or maybe even in the office. When 4 people speak and 2 people are making the decision.
Right.
And the idea that 1 hour it's not a 1 hour meeting now, it's a 14-hour meeting because there's 14 hours being spent in this meeting, right? We've now taken 14 hours of some fairly influential people's time, potentially, to sit and listen because we want to be collaborative. The idea that now is a culture or an element of our culture, when a leader realizes that, hold on, you know what, this is slowing us down because we don't make decisions quickly enough, or there's no clarity around who's making decisions. The reason why I think the notion of this being adaptive frightens leaders is that it now means that somebody has to come in and say, John, I really value your opinion, but we don't need you in that meeting. And that feels countercultural, right? Because forever I've let you come to the meeting, like you've been there. In fact, I can't remember when you weren't there. And now I'm saying, I don't want you, or you're not adding great value in this meeting, but you can add greater value somewhere else. So it requires a courage, and it requires, the courage is in sort of how you get it done, but it also requires a prescience, a forward-looking, a sense of knowing that that's what you've got to move towards. And so there's the courage piece, and there's also the sense of knowing. And I don't know how many leaders are certain enough, confident enough in what they need.
And I think there are probably any number of reasons for that. But one of which we've been talking about recently is, especially as organizations get to some size, so much of what you look at and interact with on a daily basis is the inside, not the outside.
Yes.
And it's amazing how easy it is to start losing track of what's happening on the outside that is so important to your prosperity. And people who do, though, are able, for example, to have the conversation you just talked about in a slightly different way. It'll be it'll sound less personal and perhaps just random, my opinion. Instead of saying, you're not needed, you didn't say this, but I'll take the extreme. You're not needed in the meeting, stay out. It starts with, we are being, in our product market, the competition this year is higher than it's ever been because of a new technology that people are exploiting, number one. Number two, one of the consequences of that is that some people are using that technology to undercut our cost basis and offer at cheaper prices. Therefore, to be able to adapt to these changing circumstances, we've got to be a lot more conscious about time and money, okay? And I think one of the ways that will help us is if we are more disciplined about, for example, what meetings we attend. Because it's so easy to get, but do you see?
Absolutely, yeah.
And when people do that, you're much more likely to get a positive reaction and cooperation.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I don't see that happening nearly enough.
No.
I see the team struggling with that, and collaboration just happens to be one of those things that pops up a lot at the moment, and maybe it's just easier for people to hop on a Teams call. But that was a masterclass in how to change in how to change someone's behavior ultimately, because that's where culture comes from. It's behavior repeated over time that become the habits that ultimately become your culture.